All right, this is something I've been waiting for a long time, and it is mating the gearbox and the engine together. Now, there's a chance that we could do this with the gearbox in the car, and we may be able to get the engine in and the clutch lined up and everything, and just leave the gearbox where it is. The problem is, and even on the standard RX8, is some of these bolts are an absolute pig to get to. You can see if we come up here, the gearbox sits almost entirely in the tunnel. And certainly this bolt here and this one here are an absolute, or it helps if I look what I'm filming. These guys are an absolute pig to get to. It's even harder with the V8 in the way because he's so big. You'll also notice before we whip this out, I had to put a little cross here. We are going to be cutting ourselves a tiny little maintenance flap, if you want to call it something like that. With the engine in place, you cannot get to the clutch slave cylinder to bleed it at all. We won't be able to get the line on either. So the plan is to put the line on before we install this back into the car. We'll then run the line up and bolt it across the top of the gearbox. He then clamps to here and then down to here. But to actually bleed the system, we need to be able to get to this nut here, and you can't at all. There's no access. So we're going to cut ourselves a tiny little hole big enough to get a little 11mm ratchet spanner through, and we'll just put a big rubber grommet. That'll be fine. There is one actually underneath there. I'm not really sure what it does, but that's not close enough to there for us. So that's the plan. We're going to take the gearbox out, and there's a few bits we have to take off before he comes out. Right, if I shuffle us underneath the car, you can see the gearbox there. Now, at the moment, the only thing holding it in is this, but this frame goes all the way, it's going to get really dark now, you better see. It goes all the way down to the back frame and bolts up, and it's this cross member that we need to get out, and then we can drop our gearbox out. So that is the job at hand. So the first piece to get out of the way before we pull the gearbox out is this heat shield. Now this guy bolts to that frame that runs down the middle of the car. If we jump under, sorry, shaky cam. Alright, let's see if we can get some light. So this frame that runs down the middle, that the gearbox bolts to, there are 4, and there's one of them, little points where this heat shield bolts up, and it basically goes in between where the exhaust would sit and the prop shaft. And the reason we want this guy out, oh no, don't do that, camera, there we go, is that we really want to support the prop shaft while we pull the gearbox out. And to do that, we need to get a jack or something underneath it to hold it, and you can't do it with this heat shield in the way. So 2 of the bolts are quite easy to get to. They are 12mm. They came off quite easily just with a small extender bar. 2 of them though, as you work your way down the back, are underneath the underneath the exhaust. You can see one just, hopefully, one there. They weren't super tight, they came out quite easily, but they're a real pain to kind of get around the exhaust and get in. You can't get a spanner on, and you need like a ratchet extension with a wobble bar. But that is the first thing to come out. Alright, perfect. So, as you can see with the heat shield out of the way, we've now got one jack supporting the prop, and we have another supporting this central beam that goes from the back frame all the way up to the gearbox. So, there's 2 nuts now holding the gearbox to the frame here, and there's a third one just on the other side. You actually can't see it from this side, but there's 3 in total, 21mm. Now, despite how crusty they are, they actually came out really easily. So these are loosened off now, all 3 of them, and they just came loose with a small breaker bar. So that is perfect. So we're going to finish taking these nuts off with everything supported. I'm going to put a jack also under this part of the gearbox to keep it all level, and then hopefully we are just going to pull it all out the front. Ignore everything I just said, because the gearbox is not coming out the front. As you can see, the bolts or the studs are in the rail. There's no way of dropping the rail and lifting the gearbox enough to get the studs out of these holes and then pull it out the front. So the only course of action is to take the rail out. So it looks like it's time to move some of these stands around. We need to support the rail a bit better around the gearbox. And then we've got to work our way down the back and see what else is holding it in. Well, that was heavy going. As you can see, we've got the brace dropped down. Something that confused me, there's not 3 nuts at the front, there's 4. So I got all 3 off and it was still solid as a rock. There's actually a 4th one just tucked up around the corner. So 4 nuts at the front. There's 4 at the back and a bolt that goes in sideways. So you can see this guy's still actually in place. He's loosely attached at the back, but it allows us to drop it down with plenty of clearance now to pull the gearbox out. Okay, pro tip, don't forget to drain your gearbox oil or it all comes spilling out the back when you separate the gearbox from the prop. Now there's gearbox oil all over the driveway. Still, gearbox is out, so yay. Right, we've got to lift him out now, get him on the pallet, and then we can start working on the flywheel. Man, I'm knackered now. That was a lot more work than I thought it would be. For me, there's certain parts of the build that are really important or significant, and I think other people will find the same with their builds as well. Finishing all the welding on the subframe was a pretty major... Oh my god, it's so windy. That was a pretty major milestone. Also finishing all the firewall welding so I could start working on the brakes, that felt like a really big milestone as well. This is one I've been waiting for a long time. This has been 18 months in the planning, and it's bolting the engine and the gearbox together. Before we get our torque wrench out and we actually start getting bolts in and things all lined up, and we probably scrape our knuckles and start swearing at the clutch, there is something I need to draw your attention to. And this is something I very nearly overlooked and actually ordered after I'd ordered all my clutch parts. And it's this. This is oil, which I assume has come from this seal here. So this is our crank oil seal. There's one at the back, which is the one that we're currently looking at. There's also another one at the front. The one at the front, truthfully, I probably should have swapped. You swap it out when you are doing your cam belt. There was no evidence that it was leaking, but it is probably good practice to swap it. And, well, we didn't. So we're rolling the dice a little bit on that. This one, however, obviously we've got oil around this plate. You know, it could be from the seal. And the last thing we want to do is get the flywheel and the clutch and everything in and then find that that seal is leaking because the engine's got to come out again. So rather than do that, we went to Lexus and we got a new seal, genuine seal. So that's the first thing we need to install. Okay, so we've cleaned up the surface, just got rid of all the oil. This plate actually, this is bolted and sealed to the block. So another way to take the seal out on these, by the looks of things, you can take these bolts out, you can seal the sealer across the bottom here, and then take the whole plate off, replace the gasket, and then seal it back on. But we have not gone that route. We have taken them out. So all I'm doing at the moment is, if we can get it on camera, just using, it's just regular motor oil. It's, I don't know, 540. Doesn't have to be anything special, and we're just oiling up the seal so it doesn't go in dry. You do not want to go in dry, guys. It's not a good idea. Right, I've finished up oiling both the outside and also the inside of the seal, and I've just pushed it in very lightly with my thumb. Now, to actually push this all the way in and seat it to where it needs to go, obviously we could knock it with a hammer, but I don't want to risk, I mean, you can see the damage that you can cause when you're sort of prying them in and out. We don't want to do that to the new seal, so we're going to use the old one as a drift, and we're going to hold that against there and just very gently knock all the way around to make sure it goes in square. Well, that has gone in without any trouble at all, really. It is a very tight fit, but of course it has to be to keep all the oil in, so there is that. But yeah, this has worked well, just going around in a circle, just knocking it in. It stayed pretty square. It's well seated, even all the way around. So I think we can call that job done. So now we need to get the flex plate, which went on here before the torque converter for the auto gearbox. We need that because the wind, seriously. The flywheel doesn't have any engagement for the starter motor, so we use the original flex plate, then we put on the flywheel. So I will show you that now. Okay, so there's a number of parts that we need to build up our clutch assembly. The flex plate, the original Lexus part, comes in, well, 3 pieces. We've got the actual flex plate, bit of surface rust, but he's okay, he'll be fine. We've got a metal spacer, and then this little cap that goes on before the bolts. I actually don't think we need to use this anymore because we have, oh, shaky cam, oh, the flywheel. It's so pretty. Makes the rest look a bit grotty, but you know, never mind. So, get this guy in. First of all, we need the spacer. Otherwise, the teeth are constantly engaged with, scroll up, the starter. So you need the spacer on first, like that. The flex plate then goes on this way round, so welds on the outside. You can see that it is beveled, and if you put it on this way round, again the ring sits too far back and it's constantly engaged with the starter, so it goes welds out. On you go. That's a horrible noise, like that. On the standard setup, you would then use this piece, and then these bolts go on like that. Easy. However, we are not using the torque converter. We are using the flywheel, which we will get from the box right now. Look at that. He's so nice. It makes me so happy. This is a PMC 1UZ, or 3UZ in our case, to RX8 flywheel. Lightweight aluminium with this machined steel face. These are interchangeable. You can swap these out. They're held on by, I can't count that many quickly, bolts on the back, so this holds the plate in. So you can get replacements of these. And it comes with all the bolts that we need. These are 12.9, which I think actually is the same strength, tensile strength as the originals, pretty sure. So, we can now, with our spacer, flex plate, and now the flywheel in place, we can now torque these guys up. Now, there's some things on the car that you can just sort of guess how tight they can be, you know, hand tight, snug, FT. But this is not something we are going to guess at. I have already printed, if I move my bolts out of the way, torque specs for a load of the engine bits. So we're going to scroll down these. We're going to find the torque spec for gearbox to engine, and we're also going to find the torque converter or flex plate torque settings, and we're going to snuggle this down. And then actually there's something I want to do with this plate, but we'll sort this out first. Alright, our bolts need to be done up to 98 Newton meters exactly, so we've got the torque wrench all set up. But before we do that, I'm putting just a dab, oh, are we even on the screen? There we go. Just a tiny dab of oil on the end of the threads. And then we're going to wind these in by hand. Just snug them down, just by hand, and then we will go round in a pattern and we will do these up just like you would do a cylinder head, so it sits nice and flat. So we'll get these snugged up by hand, and then we will work our way around in a star shape, get them all to 98 Newton meters. Alright, hold the phone. Now, 98 Newton meters. As I was going round and doing these bolts up, they were getting tighter and tighter, and I was thinking 98 Newton meters is a lot. And then I started to second guess myself, so I went back and researched and found that yes, that is exactly what it said. However, I was then reading through the ARP website and their bolts, and they obviously make seriously good bolts. They're recommending, if you use the ARP bolts, that they're torqued to 70, which is very different to 98. So I'm going with that, because the last thing we want to do is shear a bolt off in the crank. I would cry, and I don't mind admitting it, I would cry my little heart out. So what I have done is I've gone round and I've torqued them all up to 60 on a pass, and then we've gone up to 70, and I've gone round and very carefully, you probably won't be able to hear over the noise of the wind, check them all with the torque wrench, and we're all at 70. And that is where we're going to leave it. I dare not stretch them out to 98. I just can't do it. So if it's good enough for the ARP bolt people, it's good enough for me. Right, on to what we want to do with this guy now.